Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 169 of the Juicebox Podcast. In today's episode, I'm going to be speaking with Christina. Christina's husband is a doctor who has type 1, and one of her children, and she has 3 children, but one of them also has type 1 diabetes. This conversation goes in a lot of great directions, but mostly, in my mind, it's about the feelings around type 1 diabetes. And Christina is incredibly open and honest with her thoughts and how she feels, and so I want to thank her right up front for her transparency. This episode of the Juicebox Podcast is brought to you by the Dexcom G6 Continuous Glucose Monitoring System, now FDA permitted for 0 finger sticks. You can make diabetes treatment decisions with 0 finger sticks and no calibration. Always know where your glucose number is headed with the new Dexcom G6 Continuous Glucose Monitoring System. I am also super excited and proud to be sponsored by Omnipod, makers of the tubeless insulin pump that Arden has been using since she was 4 years old. Why use multiple daily injections or a tube pump when the Omnipod insulin delivery system is about to make a huge dash forward? It's simple, smart, and discreet as always. It's tubeless and waterproof like always, but now the new pods are going to be Bluetooth enabled. Why? Because Omnipod has just received FDA clearance for their new Dash Personal Diabetes Manager. It is small and thin and sleek, and what is today and now and exciting, it's a touchscreen personal diabetes manager. You're still tubeless, you're still wireless, but now you're holding state-of-the-art technology to control your insulin pump with. And let me tell you something, it's pretty. If you don't mind, I'd just like to remind you that nothing you hear on the Juicebox Podcast should ever be considered advice, medical or otherwise. Always consult a physician before making any changes to your healthcare plan. I am not a doctor. This is just a podcast. Okay. Sorry about that. That was actually my fault.
No problem.
I sent it the first time and realized I had one wire not connected. And I was like, oh, and I tried to stop it real fast. Christine, I say this to a few people when I start, but this one absolutely has to be the winner. This is the longest amount of time between when we first started talking and when we actually were able to record.
Oh, really?
This sets a record, I believe. I think we've been talking since maybe June? Yeah. So I'm very glad we're able to do this.
Yeah, I'm like everyone, I hear them say they were nervous, and I was like, oh, I won't be nervous, and now I'm nervous. And I'm like, what am I going to talk about? There's nothing special over here, but...
So it's funny, I was speaking just the other day to somebody on the phone privately, and we really discussed that they should come on the podcast. They completely agreed, and the first thing they said was, but what would I talk about? Yeah. And I said, well, what did we just talk about for the last 45 minutes? And she's like, well, that's not interesting. I said, I don't know. I was pretty interested. And then I told her, all the people that you said you listen to on the podcast that make you feel so much better. I said, they all have one thing in common. None of them thought their story was interesting.
Right.
And she was like, oh, okay, so this will be the same for you, really. I mean, and you have interesting stuff going on. So
yeah,
I think we could make two. Why don't you just introduce yourself any way you want to be known, and we'll start.
Okay. Well, my name's Christina, and I have 3 children, and my husband was diagnosed with diabetes 5 years ago, and then my oldest was diagnosed almost 2 years ago with type 1. So
your husband was in his early 30s when he was diagnosed?
Yeah, he was 32.
Okay. Out of nowhere, was there a family trait or?
It was out of nowhere, and he's actually a doctor, and he was in residency, and he had just started residency, and he was eating like crazy and everything, and then he said, you need to make me a doctor's appointment. I either have diabetes or I have cancer, like one or the other, because he had lost 25 pounds in a month, and now that we know all these symptoms made sense, but never in our mind was type 1. So his whole family is surprisingly 100% type 2. And
he has type
there are some autoimmune issues, like he had an aunt that died from RA, and then we're finding there's another cousin here or there sprinkled with type 1.
Mm-hmm.
So he was born and raised in Mexico, and so I know there's a strong genetic component, but there's also, a lot of his brothers and his dad, they all smoked and they're overweight, and so the type 2 made more sense, but they were all diagnosed in their 20s as well with type 2, which is more rare. Well, I mean,
your husband really has the doctor's bedside matter all fixed up already. He's like, Christina, honey, I have cancer or diabetes. Can you call the doctor for me, please?
Yeah. So it was like, and the doctor was like, well, we can see him in 3 months. And I was like, no, he needs to be seen like now.
Yeah.
Can
I ask you, when he said that to you, did you notice he was losing weight?
It's a funny thing is that other people had made comments, and I was like, oh no, I didn't really, I had noticed it somewhat, but I thought it was the stress from going from med school to working 80 hours plus, and trying to keep up as a first-year resident. So
plus, you're married and you have 3 kids. You weren't probably looking at them to begin with, right? You were just
well, yeah. Well, at that point, I just had one.
Oh, okay.
And so
well, that was your mistake. You kept looking at them. That's how you got the other ones. But what I've learned from my wife is when I come in the room, she looks the other way, even if it's into like a vacant corner. She's like, "Don't make eye contact with him. It's almost time for bed." Like I can see you just did it wrong, Christina. That's all.
Oh gosh.
Well, listen, that sucks. And then So when he's diagnosed, how does that? It's interesting because he's basically a doctor at that point, right? He's in his residency. So how does it affect you? How does it affect him? Did it affect his residency, your marriage? Like what all happened?
Well, they diagnosed him with type 2 and sent him home with metformin.
Oh, there you go.
And then, with the blood sugars, his blood sugar was like 600 something. Mm-hmm. And so we were like, okay. And then the next day, the doctor called him and said, I think you have type 1. And he was like, I think this doctor's crazy.
Okay.
But
because of the age, right? It's always the age. You think I'm too old to get that.
So it just, but then there we were within 24 hours getting in line for needles and insulin and, realizing, but no, with him, I didn't really realize, it didn't change too much for us because I didn't realize how dangerous it is and everything. And they didn't tell us about ketones. He never got ketone strips. It was like nothing, I didn't even.
Do you think because of his profession, he didn't get the full walkthrough?
Yes, they do that to us a lot. So they say, oh, this, your husband's a doctor. But the thing is that they don't even teach nutrition in med school. They get maybe an hour. People think doctors know a lot about things that they don't really know about. So they did kind of just rush us through it, and it was his healthcare system, and his his endocrinologist was a coworker. So I think they kind of just said, oh, this, but
everyone just assumes, and then your husband doesn't know what he doesn't know, and
right.
Yeah. Oh wow. So how was his beginning? Did he have a really rocky road figuring it out, or how did he figure it out?
He just kind of did it. He's more like. He gets mad at me sometimes with my daughter because I'm burned out or I'm angry or I'm like, this sucks. And he doesn't like me to be able to say that this sucks. Mm-hmm. It's like he says that's a negative outlook. So he doesn't even ever talk about it. He just goes with it.
Gotcha. He's going the Catholic route. He's going the Catholic route on you.
Yeah.
He's like, everything's fine. Just keep moving forward. Yeah. Well, first of all, let me say this to you. It does suck. And, I will absolutely sit here and reinforce with you. It sucks. I also don't think that giving a voice to the fact that this isn't a lot of fun makes you negative. It just makes it what it is.
Right.
I hear from my wife sometimes too, because I think I must wear my emotions right on my face, and I'm probably not completely aware of it. And so, just little things happen, like you make a bolus and you expect it to work and it doesn't work and it goes the wrong way. And I must just express all of that on my face. And my wife's like, God, every time I look at you about this, she's like, I feel like you're mad. I'm like, I'm not mad. I'm just like, I did this and I thought it was going to work and it didn't. And now I'm starting to do the math that I'm going to be up until 2:00 in the morning. And it's irritating.
Yes.
So I have I think I have a good outlook about it, but my outlook still has space for the fact that it sucks.
Yes.
Well, okay. So if you ever need to tell somebody it sucks, tell me. I'll agree with you.
Okay. I'll tell you. Thank you. Thank you.
You're very welcome. So does he what does he manage with? Like you said, needles in the beginning. Does he still do? Is he still on like MDI? How does he handle?
No. So he was diagnosed in September, and then December he started Omnipod because for him, tubes were like out of the question. And so he started on Omnipod, 3 months after being diagnosed, but they never approved a Dexcom for us. His doctor tried, and they just wouldn't approve it on our insurance. So once he did, once he graduated from residency and became a real doctor.
A real doctor.
He was,
Christina's married to a doctor, Yeah? I'm sure you've heard those words from somebody at some point.
Yes. It's not as fabulous as it sounds.
I have a friend who says that he's a doctor, and his boys, when they were really young, he could see moms in the neighborhood like trying to like buddy up their daughters, and he's like, I think they're trying to marry off their 9-year-olds to a doctor's kid. And I was like, he's like, it's creepy. So,
that is creepy.
Yeah. So no, I know it's not all it's cracked up to be.
Yeah,
I gotcha. I'm sorry, but he had the Omnipod. You couldn't get the Dexcom. He became a real doctor, and what happened?
Well, then he finally got the Dexcom, and then we were like shocked by what happened.
Mm-hmm.
And I think he had a lot of like hypoglycemic episodes at night that we didn't know. And, and I had another baby, like a month after diagnosis. I was pregnant with our second. And then, so a lot of the times he was on nights and did all these different shifts, and he slept alone in the room. And then I would sleep in a room with the baby because he didn't want to be,
sure,
woken up. And so I had some mornings I did feel like, oh, let me go check on him. Oh my gosh, he hasn't come out yet. So those were the only times when I kind of felt scared. But after we saw what was happening, it's a little terrifying.
That's definitely how it went for us. Like we got Dexcom back when the beginning of it wasn't as easy. You didn't just go, hey, I want this, and your insurance said yes, and you got it. It was our doctor put Arden on a blind sensor for a week, and we had to prove that she needed it. So they said, like, well, we'll take her readings for a week, and if there's danger going on, that'll help you get it through your insurance. And I was like, whatever, I'm sure it's fine. I put her to bed at 190, and she wakes up at like 85, 90. It's perfect. Like, I'm really good at this. Don't worry. I don't know how we're never going to get this, But what it showed was that her blood sugar would fall and sit at 50 for hours, and then probably her body, like her liver or whatever, something would kick in. The dawn phenomenon would happen or something.
Right.
She'd bounce back up again. So I had that feeling for a long time. Like, this is fine. This is so good. Like, I put her to bed a little high and she wakes up and it's all good. And when I see people talk online about that, like, that always breaks my heart. Like, I'm always like, I want to say to them, like, you should probably test a couple times overnight to see what's really happening.
Right.
You can't spend your time, you can't grab everybody who thinks that. So hopefully people find it out safely. So he finds it out, gets a Dexcom. Did it change how he thinks about the diabetes, do you think?
Yeah, I think it changed, every aspect. And, when you get the Dexcom, then it does take a lot more of your time because you know what's going on, and then you're treating lows and alarms are going off, and then you know how high you are constantly. So it's like, you just have to. He's pretty easy to manage, though. Like, he barely ever goes above 200.
Is he pretty active, and does he eat well and things like that, like stuff that makes it easier?
He keeps a really high basal going, and then he knows, like, there's 2 points in the day when he crashes.
Mm-hmm.
So, he doesn't eat a lot because he's so busy and he works through lunch and everything. So he kind of knows when to eat a snack. And
so he kind of cranks his basal up and then knows there's certain times a day he has to feed the insulin, kind of.
Yes.
Yeah. What kind of a doctor is he, can you say?
He's internal medicine.
Okay. So he's working in an office or in a hospital setting? How is he?
He works in an office. He does primary care.
Okay. So his day is pretty regimented then. And that makes sense because when Arden's at school, I have a way easier time managing Arden's blood sugar when she's at school than when she's at home.
Yeah.
Because there's less factors. And you can count on things happening at certain times and stuff like that. So, all right. So he's got diabetes for a few years. You're going along. It sounds like you're fairly removed from it. Like, it's something he's taking care of on his own. Do you think that he didn't fully explain to you what was going on because he was trying to be private? Or do you think that you were just so busy with the baby? Like, because it happens that most adults I talk to don't have a lot of interaction between the person with and without.
I think he just, like with his attitude of this is fine and I have this taken care of, and it was, sometimes I would see him up at midnight and I'd be like, why are you up? And he said, well, because I ate and I need to wait a few hours to see what my blood sugar is doing before I go to sleep. So he was aware of it.
Right.
knowing that he didn't want to go to bed at too low and everything, but he didn't. I don't know. I didn't even think of it.
Yeah, he didn't put enough of an explanation together where you could be like, oh, there's more to this than just
right.
He ate and he's got to wait. So, all right. So now it looks like maybe like 4 years later, your child's diagnosed from his diagnosis, or about a year ago.
Yeah, I think it was 2016. So at the end of 2015, so he was about 3 years into it, I started noticing. Well, of course, I had, been waking him up in the middle of the night for juice boxes and stuff like that now that I was hearing alarms.
Mm-hmm.
But I was pregnant with my third one at this point and exhausted.
By the way, Christina, you're not doing much for that Catholic myth about what do they call that Catholic twins, right? Is that what you had there? Is it?
No, they're all like about 3 years apart.
Oh,
so
that's not bad. You're fine.
2010, 2013, 2016,
Are you do you dodge him now at this point? Like with 3 kids, you have a stick on the side of the bed.
Well,
you just
he'll kill me for saying this, but I demanded a vasectomy this year, so it happened. Because I actually wanted more because I'm crazy, but with diabetes and everything, and I know this is a sensitive subject, but I don't think I would have had my son had I known. I didn't know that the risk was so high either. Like if the dad has it, the risk is even greater.
Mm-hmm. I think it's 10%. I think is the number. It raises your possibility. I think 10% is it. But I understand what you're saying. I've always been very open and said here that I think that my wife and I were always planning on having 3 children, and that Arden's diagnosis slowed that down.
Yeah.
If for no other reason, who would have time or energy to have sex? And but the rest of it too. I mean, joking aside, it really is. I've heard people make have the conversation on both sides of it. And it sounds completely reasonable both ways. Like I remember back to Sam Fold as an example, and I was talking to him, and he said, "No, he's it doesn't stop me from having kids." He's like, "Look, my life's fine." And I was like, "Oh, that's completely clear-headed and reasonable." And right. I've had the feeling where, oh gosh, I don't know if I can do it. Or you hear people who have 2 and 3 kids with type 1 diabetes, and you're like, "Oh my gosh, look, their whole life is feels like it's this." And I don't know. There's, it's a personal preference for sure. So okay, right. so now you're giving him juice boxes because you can hear the Dexcom now. Now he's low while he's sleeping, but you're pregnant. Probably really thrilled to be being woken up at night and finally get comfortable.
My 2-year-old's still not sleeping through the night, so it's fun.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot of fun. I don't know why you wanted more kids, by the way. You're not describing a party, Christina.
It gets worse.
Okay, well, let's hear it. So it gets worse. By the way, I've been married for 21 years. I know it gets worse.
Yeah.
But seriously, so how old it's your daughter who's diagnosed then?
Yeah, so she had just turned 5 and in November, and then around Thanksgiving and stuff, I start noticing that she's peeing a lot at night. She's drinking an obscene amount of water all throughout the day and night, and I didn't really notice the weight loss, but now when I see pictures, I'm like, how could I not see it? Because she was very thin.
That happened to us too.
And, it's just all these things, and I would tell my husband, and he said, "Oh, she's just growing." And so he didn't want to face it either. And then Christmas came. And then after Christmas, I was like, this is just getting out of control, the amount of food she's eating. Then she started getting leg cramps, which is also what my husband was getting.
Yeah. Did you tell him she's either got cancer or diabetes? We have to
so I was like, it was like Martin Luther King Day, and she was home from school. And I said, I had been begging her for a week to let me poke her finger. And she was melting down over it, so I was pushing it off. And I just said, I have to do this. So I did it, and it said high, which means over 500 for her meter.
Right.
And then I called my husband at work, and I, told him. And then I called to get into her pediatrician. She happened to be, covering the clinic that day because they were off. So I have to drive her down to a clinic further away, and then the doctor is a personal friend of ours, and they had her pee, and she walked in the room, and she looked at me and said, so what brings you guys in today? And I just said, well, So then she looked really horrible and sad and said, you need to take her to the ER right away.
Well,
so
that is, that's terrible. And I'm sorry. But at the same time, I'm interested to know, what happened. Like it's interesting to hear what happened to you, because I think so many people put off that thing. Like the people who have a husband or a wife or another child who has type 1, they see it coming and they kind of just don't want it to be, so that you put it off. I think it's kind of comforting to hear that a physician and his wife were like, no, it's probably this, it's probably that, it's probably, the same thing everyone else does. That horrible feeling of, like, I don't want to, I know what's on the other side of the door, but I don't want to open it and prove it, so maybe we'll just stand in this room forever and it won't exist,
Right.
It's comforting, I think, to hear that it happened to you too,
Yeah.
In some strange way. So she's how old when this is?
She had just turned 5, and so she was, she was fine. She didn't have, I think she had like mild, maybe moderate ketones, but she was perfectly fine. She wasn't in DKA or anything, and we went to the ER, and so they wanted to admit her, but I refused because, I'm sitting there pregnant as can be. My 2-year-old's on me. My husband was never able to make it to the ER. They wouldn't release him from work. And my mom was with me, thankfully, but, so I said, we can handle this. Is there a way to do it outpatient? So we have to drive like about 45 minutes to where they have pediatric endocrinology for us. And so we just did that 4 days in a row and met with them for about 4 hours a day. And it was overwhelming, and I couldn't quit crying. I was sobbing hysterically, and I was angry with my husband, which is another sensitive subject, because it's not like it's his fault. It's not like he has to be born with that,
right?
Or to have this happen to him. But I was angry because it was,
it felt like it came from him, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And had I known this, when I married you or something, maybe we wouldn't have had kids, or maybe,
you just have to,
I don't know.
You put yourself in that position where you're rerunning all your decisions and.
Right.
Yeah.
So it just opens this whole new can of worms, and I have to work through all these feelings of anger and, like, what am I doing now? What about my other kids now? And, and it becomes this horribly overwhelming, because when he was diagnosed, it was like, here you go. And then it was like, oh, here's a social worker. Here's I don't know, like a child development specialist. Here's a nutritionist. Here's the doctor, and here's the nurse. And, you're holding her down. I hear people say on your show, like, how easy it is and how their kid handles their shots well. Well, this was not the case for us. I mean, it was like, I remember sitting outside begging her, like, you have to take this. And I have to tell my 5-year-old, you're either going to die or you're going to let mommy give you this injection, because this is what's going to keep you alive now. And having to tell your daughter that at the age of 5, but it totally changed her after that. Then she kind of realized the seriousness of it.
Yeah. This lady's not just trying to poke me because she's bored. And no, I hear you. I've said before, Arden was never really thrilled with shots. And there were times where I had to like sit on her to give her injections and things like that, like actually hold her down to do it, because she would just run if you didn't. And,
right.
And, even to this day, at 13, when she's pretty good with like changing sites and stuff like that, but you can still see she tenses up a little bit, and it's still not, even though she's like, it doesn't, at this point, she's like, it doesn't hurt, but I can't not tense up.
Yeah.
And I'm like, no, I understand. And this is, my gosh, at this point, what are we talking about here? This is 11 or more years later, and it's still, it's not just free and easy for her.
Right.
I get that. And how do you rationalize with a 5-year-old? Like, you made me think when you said, you had to be like, look, you're going to die if we don't do this. It might sound really harsh to people, but I remember the first time my son made an all-star baseball team. He was like, it was the summer he was 6 years old. And I remember dropping him off at the first practice and kind of like leaving him alone, letting him be there. And at the end, scooping him up, and we're walking over to the car, and I was like, what did you think? How was it? And he's like, he was real excited and he loved it. And he said, but the coach kept saying this thing. He goes, I didn't know what he was talking about. I was like, well, what? Maybe I could explain it to you. And he goes, he said that we should all be more aggressive. And I was like, yeah. So, be more aggressive. He's like, well, what does aggressive mean? And I thought, oh, he's 6. There's a word he's never heard before, right? He has no context, and he has no context for it. So I just spend time, like, I forget how I ended up doing it. I think I ended up using like a tiger as an analogy. I was like, imagine if, there was a tiger and it attacked something. I'm like, the act of it attacking, that act is aggressive. That's aggressive. And then I broke it down into other ways and into sports metaphors. It took the entire ride home to explain a word to my 6-year-old.
Yeah.
And like, so how do you, How do you take a 5-year-old and say, hey, look, there's this medicine, there's this thing inside of your body, it stopped working. It's just like that's a lot of information for a 5-year-old. And that's why it's such a weird spot, because Arden was 2 when she was diagnosed. She didn't know. We just did it.
Right.
But at 5, your kid's got context. She can talk. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like she's going, wow, this was not happening to me last week. And this is not pleasant. It's a very strange. And you're pregnant. How pregnant were you when she was diagnosed?
Well, that was January, and I had him in May. So
halfway. So you were like second trimester. Hormones happening, all that stuff. Husband's a doctor. Yeah, there's a lot going on. You're by yourself with those kids and the pregnancy and oh my gosh. Well,
and then, having to hold her down, and it's just horrible to do. And so luckily, because of him being a physician and stuff, they moved us along, because they don't normally let people start pumps so quickly. But within a month, we were on a pump.
And does she like that better? Did she use the same pump that her dad's using, or no?
Well, we used the Animas. Mm-hmm. Well, she's on Omnipod now, but we did use the Animas. Our insurance actually doesn't cover Omnipod, and so we pay out of pocket for it. And so we went with the one first, and we liked it. And there's some things that I actually miss about it when I switch to Omnipod.
Okay.
But I definitely don't miss the technology, because they were so behind.
And that Animas is the company that's
going out
of business. Yeah. So.
But the cannula, I think, is where we struggle the most, because she used the needle infusion set before. And so I think we have more issues now with absorption and stuff like that we didn't have with the needle set. But
do you just change more frequently when you do? It must be hard because you're paying cash, but you must just change it more frequently if you have to.
Well, we do if we have to, but I mean, even just doing site changes is it's horrible for us.
Yeah. No, I hear that. She still has issues with it. Arden doesn't like Omnipod clicks before it goes in.
Right.
And so but the insertion doesn't always happen on the same click, and Arden counts them. And she's like 1, 2, 3, 4, and she'll get to 5, and when 5 doesn't happen, you can see she's like, what the? And in that gap of time where, oh my God, it didn't happen, then it happens. And I have to be perfectly honest, if it wasn't something she didn't like, I would have to laugh. I do laugh at her sometimes. When it happens, I'm like, this is hilarious. I was like, Arden, we've changed this pump every 3 days since you were 4. Like, she's had Omnipod since she's 4. I'm like, so what are we talking about here? Like 7, 8 years, right? Maybe more at this point. And I was like, are you really surprised by it? She goes, no. I was like, does it hurt? And she goes, no. And I'm like, well, what is all this about? She's like, I don't know. So I think as your daughter gets older, I've said this to a couple of people, and you've probably heard me say it to them, but I'll say it to you because I think you maybe need to hear it. By the time Arden got done using shots, I had calculated that I probably stuck her in some way, shape, or form, like over 10,000 times.
Oh my gosh.
And a couple of years into Omnipod, she got sick one day, and I thought I couldn't tell if the pod was not, just needed to be changed, or if she was resistant to insulin. So I thought, well, I'm going to inject some insulin. And I thought, well, because if her blood sugar moves real quickly, then I'll change her pump. And if it doesn't, then it's not the pump and she just needs more insulin. Excuse me. So I get out the syringes that we have that are kind of like backups, jammed way down in a drawer somewhere. I pull one out, I draw some up, I tell her, hey, I'm going to give you some insulin with this. And she just looks at it like she'd never seen it before in her whole life. And she goes, what is that? And I said, it's a needle. I'm going to give you the insulin with it. And she's like, how? Really, what are you even talking about? I get my insulin through that pump, Yeah. And I explained it to her. She had literally no recollection of ever having a needle in her entire life. So maybe your daughter maybe a lot of it will go for her. Do you know what I mean? It won't be as impactful on her as you're imagining. It's probably more of the sadness on your side. But I have to tell you, too, I don't remember that sadness anymore very much either. So there will be a day where this all doesn't exist for you. You know what I mean?
Good, yes. Yeah, I think it is harder for the parent sometimes than it is for the kid, but...
It absolutely can be. I've admitted here before, I've never given myself a shot. I've never tested my blood sugar. I've never inserted a pod or a Dexcom or none of that, because I always thought if it hurt, then I'd know it hurt. Then I would know what it felt like, and then how would I do it? Do you know what I mean? At least now I have this veil of ignorance. And I know that everybody doesn't agree with me on this, but I have this veil of ignorance. I don't know what it feels like. And I am the one who's supposed to be doing this. Like, I'm the doctor in this little situation in our life, right? Like, I can't cut your leg open with a scalpel if I know what it feels like, maybe. Like, you know what I mean? Like, so I have to do this thing. I think it's better for me not to completely know what it feels like. And I'm sure some people agree and some people don't agree. That's how it always struck me. So
yeah,
I definitely get how hard, because it was hard for me too. Like, I would, do something and then go cry and then, come back and be like, everything's fine. Everything's great. I'm not crying. No, I totally get it. Well, in your email, this is funny. People won't know how to like make sense of this time. We're recording this in November of 2017. You and I started talking in June of 2017. This probably won't post until February or March of 2018. So it'll almost be 10 months since we actually spoke the first time. But in your initial email, you said that the podcast sometimes feels like therapy for you. And I was wondering how so. Earlier in the show, I told you a little bit about the Omnipod insulin pump, and now I'm going to tell you a little more. Today, I want to focus on the ease of use for the Omnipod. So not only is it tubeless and wireless, so the personal diabetes manager doesn't actually in any way connect to the pump itself, it's wireless, and the pump itself doesn't have any tubing. So, how does it do that? You might be wondering. It's pretty simple. The Omnipod is just this tiny little device that you fill with insulin, apply to your skin, and then press start on your personal diabetes manager. It inserts the cannula automatically and begins delivering your insulin, all with a touch of a button. It is actually as simple as I just made it sound. Arden's been using it since she was 4 years old, and next month she will be 14 years old. 10 years we've been using the Omnipod. It is spectacular. Please go to juiceboxpodcast.com and click on the links, or there are links in the show notes to your podcast app. But in the end, you need to go to myomnipod.com/juicebox. And there, Omnipod will set you up with a free, no obligation demo pod, where you can actually apply a pod to yourself and wear it and see what you think. There's no risk, it doesn't cost you anything, and I'm telling you, after 10 years, you couldn't make a better decision. myomnipod.com/juicebox, with the links in your show notes or at juiceboxpodcast.com. Also, if you'd like to see the new personal diabetes manager from Omnipod, the new Dash PDM, I'll put a link in the show notes for that too. I have some pictures back on my blog. You said that the podcast sometimes feels like therapy for you, and I was wondering how so.
Well, I think it's just because you live in your little bubble, and for me, like, we've tried to make other friends with type 1 or other families, so you have somebody that understands, because people, no matter how much they want to, they don't understand what your life is like or what you go through. And you hear people whining that, oh, their kid was sick, so they had to stay up with them last night, and you're like, well, that's my life every day.
Yeah. It's hard to find compassion for them in that situation. Yeah, oh, did that happen to you once this year?
You poor thing.
Yeah.
So to hear other people, and just, even like you said, just hearing other people's stories of diagnosis or how it, unfolded for their family or how they're dealing with it or anything, it gives you that, kind of sense that there's other people out there doing, struggling with the same things, and that we're all, we're spread out across the country and across the world, but we're all in it together still. And just to hear that just gives you, like, I don't know, kind of a sense of relief, or to hear other people say they're struggling with something that you're struggling with, or,
It makes you feel like you're not doing it wrong.
Right.
So, like, you can have that feeling like, oh my gosh, I'm struggling, I must not understand something about this. But when you find out that that's something that happens to everybody, maybe it's part of a growing process or a learning process, it takes a lot of the guilt away.
And then, you help all the time. Like, you say how it doesn't get easier, you just get insanely better at dealing with it, or you say, don't beat yourself up, and you're constantly giving kind of things out there that I think people need to hear. And if you're listening to it after you've had a particularly rough night or day, it's just, it's therapeutic to hear that, everything's going to be fine, and you'll get this, and start over. You always say start over. That's in the past, it's done. I think you should do like like a Scott's Best Advice episode.
But then we'd have to say it's not advice at this time. We'd call it
which you should plug in.
Best Advice, Not Really Advice episode. I have considered just putting one together. It's like these are the episodes that people find the most valuable. I actually might put a call out to people and have them tell me what their 5 favorite episodes are, so we can sort of, because the other thing is too is like I'm the one making the podcast. Sometimes after I go back and I edit it and I have a chance to listen to it again, it's been months since I've recorded it when that happens. And I'll listen and I'll be like, this person was great, which is why you'll hear me on like the beginning of a lot of the episodes go, this is like the best episode, because it's not that I have like, a memory problem and that I didn't just say that 2 weeks ago. But for me, like I hear it again, I'm like, oh, this was great. Like I forgot how great this was. Or even in the midst of saying it, like having the conversation, it didn't strike me right away that something someone said was so impactful. Or at times, humbly, like I'll say something that later I'll hear it and I'll go, wow, that was really smart. Like I didn't know that when I was saying it.
I actually write things down that you say and I keep them to go back and read them sometimes.
Oh, I'm embarrassed and touched. Thank you very much. I really like that. I always tell people, I was like, can we just get my wife on here real quick so she can... I had a private phone call with somebody last week, and she was going on and on about what the podcast meant to her. And I think there was part of me, like this little just childish part of me that like I wanted to put it on speakerphone and be like, listen to other people, how they think about me. But it's also you also don't have to live with me, Christina. You very much might not like me either if you had to spend a whole week in this. I'm just kidding. I think my wife likes me. I can't. It's hard to tell. And so, well, let me. So that's really. First of all, I'm really great to hear that the podcast does that for you. So it makes me feel like it must do it for other people too, which I find really like it's heartwarming. But you said something that I just found really super interesting. Like you tried to make type 1 friends. So imagine that. Like when you go out to make friends, first of all, making friends as an adult is not that simple. Right. And then when you put parameters on it, like, well, these people have to be probably near my age, have kids near my age, have similar interests as us. They got to be as excited to go see Thor this weekend as I am, or an art house movie, not Thor, like whatever it ends up being. I like this kind of food. And then on top of that, you narrow your field down by, plus I need you to have type 1 diabetes. That's like Craigslist kind of stuff. Like, how are you ever going to find anybody I picture you at a dinner party going to your husband, I really like these people. Find out if they have diabetes.
You're making me sound crazy.
No. Christina, listen, I'm going to tell you what I tell my wife. You're doing that yourself. I'm just kidding. She's not crazy. You're not crazy. It was just a cheap joke. But you're not. But I understand what you're saying. Like you're looking for this person who can not just be a friend, but understand what's happening.
More so for my daughter because she asked. So we did meet a boy that's 9 that has type 1, and that was the first type 1 she had met, and she just thinks it's the most amazing thing ever that there's someone like her. Like she can't even grasp, that there's people out there like her. And we haven't taken her to camp because it's hours away and it's kind of inconvenient to get that week off and then to do that with all the kids, the family camp.
Yeah. Where are you at in the country?
We're in California, in Northern California. So they do have a camp, but it's like in the Central California, and it's a 3-4 hour drive, which is not fun with little kids. And, it's just not something high on our list right now.
Plus you drop her and you have to drive 4 hours home and you're 4 hours away then.
Yeah.
When she's at the camp. And if you have an issue, that's how far she, it's funny.
Yeah.
My daughter's never been to diabetes camp, and yet I've had people on here who talk about it, directors from camps, people who have gone. They all find it to be the most amazing thing. And when I talk to Arden about it, she doesn't seem to be in any way interested in it. And so I'm like, all right, well, I think my kid's just not a camp person. Like take the diabetes out of it. You know what I mean? Like when you're like, hey, so we'll take you to this place for a week in a cabin, and you can already see she's just like, whoa, wait, have I done something wrong? Like am I being, is this a punishment? I don't need to leave the house. I got Netflix here. I don't understand what you're saying. Why do I have to go?
I'm with Arden.
Yeah. I don't think she's a camper at heart.
Yeah.
The last vacation we took that was just in Vermont, we rented a house for a few days, and the house was wonderful, and they were still like way too much nature. And I was like, okay, all right. So I think my kids are more of they're more beach people, to be perfectly honest. So, and that even has been our our family getaway for years. We don't go every year. It's way too expensive to do that, but we've been a handful of times to St. John in the Virgin Islands, and now it's been hit so hard by the hurricanes that I don't even genuinely know if it's there to visit or not. You know?
Yeah.
So, okay, let's kind of like regroup for a second.
Well, let me tell you what I have done so you don't think I'm so crazy.
No. First of all, no one thought you were crazy. Again, just a cheap joke. This is a really great episode. You are being really honest. I don't think you're crazy at all. But tell me more, and then I'll follow up.
Well, I reached out to the school nurses, right? And we have a lot of schools in our city. And ironically, my daughter goes to a private school 30 minutes away in another town, which has its own set of issues with diabetes and that they don't have a school nurse. And, that's a whole nother can of worms, but trying to manage it from far away. But I reached out to the school nurses and I said, I'm trying to start this group, for our county and, just with parents, so we can get together, we can get our kids together. Maybe we can have some education or something. So I have my master's in public health and I did health promotion, health education. So I was kind of routing it that way. But nobody responds and parents just aren't kind of interested. So I think everyone's so busy with their own life that it's hard enough just to deal with, everything they have going in their family, that's how the world's going, that it's hard to get people together often.
I agree. I am a stay-at-home dad of 2 kids. One of them has diabetes. I do this podcast. And other than that, I pretty much vacuum and grocery shop and do things like that. And I've been trying to get together with a friend of mine for lunch for like 6 months. And I can't seem to make it happen. And so I get that. And I also get how much all those people would love it if you guys did get together once in a while. And, I'll have to think about how to, it's going a little slower than I hope, but we're really thinking of like taking the podcast out into the world and doing it in front of like a group. And so I'll be doing it in March, I think in New Jersey at a JDRF conference. And I have a phone call tomorrow about one in January in Arizona, which by the time people hear this will have happened a long time ago. But I think that the conversation you and I are having, but with a bunch of people who could all, have like maybe little micro conversations with me back and forth and like we're doing now, and then move on to something else. By the time everybody got through their question, my imagination says that everyone's question would pretty much encompass what everybody's thinking,
Yeah.
And I think that would be really cool. I don't know if you heard the last episode, number 168, but it was an interview and a review of the Dexcom G6. Here's how it was an interview, an inter-review, if you will. I had Jake Leach on. He's the Senior Vice President of Research and Development for Dexcom. And I basically gave Jake my feelings about having used the G6 now for the past 4 or 5 weeks. And then Jake was there to give us a deep dive into how some of the things that I asked about work. I thought it was interesting. I hope you heard it. And if you didn't, you should go check it out. But I bring it up because it's going to give you a lot of information about the new Dexcom G6, and that's what this ad is about. If you go in the link in your show notes or juiceboxpodcast.com, or just go to dexcom.com/juicebox, there you'll be able to get all the information you need in the world about the glucose monitor that is the center of everything you hear about here on the podcast. It's easy to say, I want to be able to see my kids' blood sugar while they're at school, or my mother's blood sugar while she's in Florida. I don't know where people go or why they do things, but it is nice to be able to see their blood sugar when they're not with you. That is good. I love that. I think it's great to know what direction your blood sugar is moving in and how fast it's going. It can be a real safety feature as well while I'm sleeping. But in the end, to me, the real focus of what the Dexcom G6 is this. You need to understand where your blood sugar is, where it's going, and how fast it's going to get there to make good decisions about your health. The Dexcom opens up a world of information that allows you to make those decisions simply, easily, and effectively. You should definitely go to dexcom.com/juicebox or click on the links in your show notes to find out more. So you really talked about in your email, like burnout. You said there was one specific episode. Was it Super Stephanie? Was that the one?
Yes.
And you said that it just really helped you. Where were you at that point before you heard that episode?
I think that I'm just kind of really, I still feel burned out, to be honest, but I just kind of keep it in because people in my family do not like to hear that. It's like you're not allowed to feel this. This is just go on with the day and that's it. So it's I just feel overwhelmed with alarms constantly going off. My husband sleeps through his, he sleeps through my daughter's, and then, the baby being born and then having, breastfeeding a baby, you're up all night anyways. Breastfeeding, it requires more, and just everything going on. And my daughter also has a hole in her heart, so she's going to need surgery to fix that at some point. So we've gone through that her whole life.
Holy
and then
crap, Christina. Hold on a second. Which you were just like, oh, not only that. Which child is the child with diabetes or a different?
Yes.
Oh, she's losing the luck lottery. So is that something that we're not worried about in the moment? It's just it has to get to a certain growth spot before it can get fixed.
Yeah, so she was born in New York City. We were there for 3 years, and then we moved on to Connecticut for 3 years, and he worked in Massachusetts, but we lived in Connecticut. And, they found it when she was 6 months. She had a murmur. They sent us to a specialist. They were pushing us for open heart surgery. This needs to be done now. I met with someone at NYU. I couldn't stand the surgeon. He was so arrogant. I told, there's no way he's touching my daughter. And the idea of them stopping your child's heart and cutting in and then putting her on bypass and circulating the blood, this is not high on my list.
Of things to do right away.
With my firstborn, who I'm super protective of,
right.
And, somebody that just rubbed me really the wrong way.
And so one of the other options was to wait a little longer?
Well, so he was ending he was graduating and starting residency. So I said, let's wait and we'll find a new doctor in Massachusetts. Boston Children's is there. It's the best. So we found another doctor, and they came up with completely different numbers and said it's not as big as they were saying. I don't know why they were saying this. And so I was like, you're crazy. So we go to another doctor, and they said it's not that big. So then we went to Boston Children's, and, they were like, oh, she's totally a candidate to do a cath lab procedure instead of open heart surgery, and she can wait until school age.
Oh, that's great. Yeah.
So now we just had follow-up, and they said she might even be able to wait till she's in her 20s to close this. So.
Oh, no kidding. Oh, that's really something. And the first guy was just like, I'll just cut her chest open and it'll all be fine.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you sniffed him out. You did the right thing. Does that help you with the diabetes too? Like, how often are you with an endocrinologist who says something that you're like, I don't think that's right?
The endocrinologists don't bother me. The dietitians kind of drive me crazy.
What do they want from you?
Well, I just think that they're not realistic in life.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they really annoy me, Scott. It's like at the last meeting, so we had this nurse that we really loved, and she moved to a different site. And so then they started seeing patients here one day a week in our town. And I think your relationship with the nurse is more important with the doctor. The doctor comes in for a few minutes and, says, all right, maybe we can make this change, or looks, everything's great. Right. So the nurse is more important. With this nurse here, I just wasn't feeling it. And then the dietitian last time, it's just like, gasp, I'm feeding her, yogurt in the morning or cereal. And that is just so sugar laden. And I wouldn't feed that to my daughter. And, it's just like they always come in and for some reason they're like these anorexic, older, skinny women that look like they barely ever eat.
All you have to do is eat this kelp. It's great. You'll learn to love it. So what it makes me think of, what you're saying makes me think of, I love it when somebody's standing in front of me in like this perfect physical condition. And they're like, you could do this too. What you just need to do is you have to quit your job and you work out about 19 hours a day and you just run and you eat this and you drink this protein. And I'm like, wait, is that what you do to be like that? I'm like, I would like to be more in shape, but I can't do that. Like, I think some people are lucky enough in either their constitution or their situation where they can put themselves in almost a perfect situation to accomplish this thing. Right. Which is great. But if we all were Instagram workout models, then none of the other things in the country would get done. And so we all can't do that. And I think sometimes it's almost like, do you ever be pulled over by a police officer who gives you the letter of the law and you're like, I do agree with you in theory, but here are these other things you're not considering, but they always have the law on their side. They're always able to go, no, this is how it goes because this is what the law says. I think that the dietitians do the same thing. They go, look, in this perfect situation, if you exactly did this, then everything would be great. And you're like, yeah, but this isn't the real world. The real world is I have 3 kids and they're all hungry. And like, how am I going to do all that? So once in a while, my kid's going to get a bowl of cereal and then not that I feel great about the cereal to begin with. And then I have to sit down and listen to you tell me that it's bad. I already knew it was bad.
Yeah.
A lot of fun. Why do you not just don't go to those?
So I called the nurse that I'm like, and I said, look, I'm going to drive all the way over there to see you at this new site because I can't handle this stuff anymore. Because we had it before to where we would see the doctor and then they would say, you have any more questions? We'd say no, we'd leave. So the 4-hour appointments went down to like 45 minutes.
Yeah. And
now that this new site, they don't know what Omnipod is. They don't know how it works. They're overwhelmed. Where's her data? And I'm having to give it to them. And, it's just like overwhelming for them.
Well, we wouldn't want them to be taxed.
So it's just like, so she agreed to let us go every 6 months now because this is ridiculous to go every 3 months. If her A1C is fine, I mean, and it's 7.1. I'd like it to be better. I'm working towards it being better. But, like the doctor told me last time, you need to relax. He said, I think what you're looking for is an A+, and you have an A. So just, calm down.
If you can keep the variability out, I can't disagree with that. Like as long as her blood sugar is not like 300 for a few hours and then 70 for a few hours, and that's how you're getting your middle ground number. I think if you can keep the variability, the up and down out of the blood sugar, a 7.1's amazing. Like, you know what I mean?
They're very against lows, and I told him the last visit, I said, show me the evidence of that, having lows every now and then, but unfortunately it's a little more than every now and then. But
how low are we talking about?
In the 650s, 60s, most of the time in the 60s.
Oh, so I would tell you that I don't like Arden's blood sugar to get under 70, but when it's 65, I don't think it's low. I just get it back up again.
Right.
When she's if she hits a 50 and I can bounce it right back again, I don't think twice about that. If she hits 50 and sits there, I work very hard to get out out of it quickly.
I do things now, like I set it at the alert. Sometimes at night I'll set it to go off at 100.
Mm-hmm. So you can react a little quicker.
Yeah, because I'd rather be able to stop her basal instead of having to wake her up and give her juice, because inevitably it's like this. With her, she's very sensitive. So you stop her pump and she usually reacts very quickly.
Pumps up pretty quick still.
Yeah, but otherwise you give juice and then it's this ping pong and it's like, should I give insulin? Should I not give insulin? Sometimes I do. And then it backfires on me and then, you're needing more juice. And so.
Yeah. Actually, if you give me a second, I'm going to tell Arden to bolus here for a second.
No problem.
So, I know exactly what you're talking about, and we go through the exact same things here. I think giving yourself the warning, giving yourself time to do something with the basal rate is such a great way to handle it, because also nobody wants to be drinking juice in their sleep, and it sucks, like it all really does. And so I definitely try to do as much as I can with manipulating through the basal. This morning, Arden got up this morning. She was upstairs. I was downstairs packing her lunch, and she was upstairs, and I saw her blood sugar at 95. And now she'd been going up in the mornings, so I watched, and the arrow never changed. So the arrow was still always straight across. It wasn't diagonal up or anything. Let me get a drink. And but then the next time it refreshed, she was like 98, then she was 103, and then I said, "Ooh, it's happening. Like she's going to go up here." So I said to her when she came upstairs, I said, "Real quick before you stuff everything in your backpack." I think I had her bolus like 0.8 or something like that. And she's like, my blood sugar is like 100. I'm like, it doesn't matter. It's going to go up. So bolus the 0.8, and it worked. And she was just like 110 like all morning. And she started to drift up again right before lunch. And I actually didn't do anything about it. I let her drift up to like 140, and then we just gave her this great bolus, this pre-bolus. Now she needs now it's been, it's been like 2 hours and 40 minutes later, and she needs another half a unit because she just, as you and I are talking, I saw her drift up to 160. And so we just bolused again, and my goal is she'll be home in about an hour, and I'd like her to be back down around 90 because she's going to come in the house hungry and want a snack and all that other stuff. So I love the idea of manipulating the basal. I think it's one of the absolutely most undervalued tools if you have an insulin pump.
Right.
You just definitely can make so many great adjustments with the basal insulin. So good for you. So you're doing well. Like you're 7'1", you've got it figured out. You got 33 kids. That's a problem. But I mean, and the husband seems a little focused on being a doctor, which I imagine is what being a doctor is. And that sucks. Do you feel, because you started to talk earlier, and I wanted to get into it, and at the same time I was like, I don't want to like ruin this person's life. But at the same time, like I know how you feel right now. Like you feel alone, right? Like everyone's looking to you for something, not just the medical stuff, but the medical stuff seems bigger. It feels bigger. It feels like you're sort of in charge of people's life and death decisions and their long-term health. And it's a lot of pressure. And then your husband's got his diabetes on his own. So he probably feels like he's already doing this. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, so you're doing it for your daughter, but you're also worried about him. You've got these other two kids. Hole in the heart. Mom's somewhere. You got a lot going on.
Fatal nut allergies.
Do you really? What is that? Say that again.
My middle child is allergic to nuts. So I say
that kid's going up for adoption. That's enough of that.
Like every green playground,
Right.
Glucagon got it. EpiPens got it.
Oh my gosh.
Like come to me if something's wrong.
I can save like 15 different people's lives if you guys need anything. I have a bag full of stuff over here. But is that about right? Does it just feel like it all kind of falls to you, right?
Yeah, it does. And then, like I have, not to get too much into it, but it's like, I gave up working and gave up nursing school when I found out I was pregnant with my first one. And then it wasn't planned. So it was kind of a surprise. And that kind of, my life's been on hold for 8 years. And now I'm ready to kind of do something more than be, listen to everyone and do, meet everyone's needs. So I'm kind of starting to feel like, what about me?
Yeah.
It's
a common, listen, if it makes you feel any better, it's not gender related either. I have the same exact, I didn't think that I would be a stay-at-home parent still when my last child was 13.
Yeah.
But you look at our day and how things go and what my wife's job requires of her. And it's just, we both couldn't get up and leave in the morning. It just wouldn't work.
Right.
And so here I am. I'm going to be a stay-at-home dad until I'm 50. And then I'm sure the working world will open its arms right back up to me where I can become a cashier. It's I'm assuming, right? Like that'll be like pretty much what I can shoot for. And it's just one of those things, like it is hard not to feel like your life is passing you by, while you're taking care of other people, and why I've talked before about having to find like some really deep meaning in taking care of your family so that it doesn't feel like you're just performing tasks, that there's a bigger thing for you. Like, I hope you could find that, or maybe you have, but I think that's the only way out of it, to be honest.
We had some people over for dinner. They were all doctors and Hector's friends. And one of them was talking to me, kind of just saying that he kind of understands what I go through. And then he looked at me and he said, "What an honor to be able to take care of your family." And it made me feel so horrible because I'm like, that should be how I'm looking at it, but that's not how I feel most days.
He was like, "What an honor." And you're like, "Actually, I was thinking of putting all these people in a sack and throwing them in the river." So is that okay? Can we all go out to the garage for a second, sit in the car and listen to some music? Let's start the car to stay warm.
Yeah.
Everybody look over the bridge. Oh, a little farther. No, I hear what you're saying. And again, that's just like the nutritionist, really. That's advice from an academic place. Isn't it an honor to take care of your family like this? Well, yeah, sure it is, except that doesn't take into account any of the real world things that are happening to me right now. And wouldn't it be if your kid just ate this celery for lunch, her blood sugar would never move? Well, yeah, that's great. You talk my 5-year-old into eating a salad every day. Like that kind of an idea. And yet you get the intent of what the person said to you because, again, academically, I do feel like that. Right. Like it is really great, but there are definitely days where you're just like, no one listens to me. I'm like invisible here.
Yeah.
I'm just the person who makes things happen.
Right.
You're the switcher that makes the trains run on time. Nobody ever gets on the train and thinks, I really should find the guy that made sure this train was on time and thank him. Like, right?
Right.
It never works that way. You thank you thank the guy running the train because it seems like he's doing it, but it turns out he's not. There's somebody behind the scenes doing it, and that's you. It's me. It's everybody who's in our position. And I do think that it is largely a thankless job that you have to find your own thanks in, because to think that my 13-year-old's going to stop and be like, "Hey, Dad, right on. Good job with this."
Yeah.
Like she's just like trying to get to the next thing, do her homework, brush her teeth, go to bed. She's got her own stuff she's trying to remember.
Yeah.
It's as fulfilling as it is crappy, kind of like.
I think also, that's where the show helps me too, because it's like there was a diabetes educator on not too long ago, and she was talking about how their brains aren't developed till they're 25 and they need their parents' help. And of course I know this, I've taken these classes, and I was like, oh my gosh, and then I hear you say how you're in the background helping Arden. You guys were at a birthday party or something, and you saw the look on her face, and you were just like, I got this, eat what you want or do what you,
right.
I'll be back here. And they do need us, and it's a huge burden that they're going to live with for the rest of their life. So if we could, take some of it off of them for now, while they are, just being a child,
it seems very important to do. Yeah, right. It seems very important to do. I think you're right. I feel that way. I do think there's stuff to learn, trial by fire stuff, but it doesn't have to be every day, all day long. It doesn't have to be at the expense of their A1C too, which is
right.
Which is when you hear other people talk about like, hey, my son's he's 15 and he's doing this by himself. He's doing great. His A1C is like 8. And I'm like, well, you know what? That's amazing. A 15-year-old maintaining an 8 A1C is crazy good. But what if you were in the mix a little bit? Like, would it be a 7? And could he still be learning? You know what I mean? Like, and so that's more how I think about it. And then I probably trend a little bit to the other side where I take a little more on. Like there's, last night, Arden's blood sugar last night was like 135, and it got real sticky like overnight at 135. About 4 a.m. Like it went up, I bolused, it didn't come back down, it needed more basal, and I stayed up for about 45 minutes or an hour to make sure I got it back to where I wanted it to be. And a lot of people might hear that and go, look, if my kid's blood sugar was 145 and steady overnight, I'd be sleeping. And I get that. And there are nights, by the way, that I'm so exhausted, I don't do it. But if I can, I will. Do you know what I mean? Just try to steal some A1C points where you can. Is kind of how I feel about it. So I think you're doing great. I mean, listen, you have a lot going on. Like you genuinely do. And for how much you have going on, the one thing you're not giving yourself credit for is you're aware of it. Like you're aware of how you feel, and you're aware of how you want to feel, and you're aware of what your goals are. That's probably most of the battle. You'd be surprised at how many people are in your situation who just think everything's going great. They just ignore stuff and think nothing of it. Like you're aware of it. And I think that's most of it. I think you'll find your way through the rest of it. But because you're aware of what your goal is. I don't know if you feel that way or not, but I think you should.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
You're welcome. I'm literally nobody, and I shouldn't be even saying that to you. But it seems to me like it's just a big difference. Like, there's a difference between being overwhelmed and being crazy, right? Crazy people don't know they're crazy. They're just like, I'm fine. Everybody else is wrong. But if you're just a little overwhelmed, you go, look, I understand that how I feel right now is not my goal. Like I do want to feel honored to take care of my family. You know what I mean? Like, but at the moment I don't. But at least it's visible. You can get to it.
Yeah.
It seems to me. Oh, what's going on here? Some alarms on my phone going off that I genuinely don't know what they're for. But we've been talking for 59 minutes, so maybe we'll just call it the end of the podcast alarm, and that'll be the end of it. Did we not cover anything that you were hoping to talk about?
No. I didn't really come into it with any map or anything like that. I was more concerned about what I was going to be able to say.
Well, that's excellent, because I think that they go much better when nobody pre-plans. So I thought this was great, and thank you very much. I really appreciate you coming on. If you would give me a second to stop the recording, I'd love to say thank you in person. Wow. Thank you so much, Christina, for being so incredibly open and honest. This was a real gift for people who get to listen. Thank you also to Dexcom and to Omnipod for sponsoring the show. It goes without saying, but without the ads, I can't bring you the show. Without the show, You don't hear Christina, etc., circle of life kind of stuff. Thank you very much for your support. You can go to myomnipod.com/juicebox or dexcom.com/juicebox to find out more. Oh, one last thing. I really appreciate you listening, and I'll see you next week.